What's going on, guys? My name is Richard. Welcome to this week's Stock Market Outlook video. As always, we'll talk through the price action of the leading stocks in the market, the market indexes, my previous weekly watch list, then we'll also cover a few different sources of sentiment from my surveys, the exposure index, as well as the IBD Big Picture article, and the GMI signal from wishingoutball.com. We'll be talking through a lot today, so feel free to use the timestamps down below to navigate to your preferred part of the video. And if you enjoy my analysis, please go ahead and leave a like down below. It really does help me out and my channel. And of course, subscribe if you're new and looking forward to more videos just like this one every single week. All right, so diving right in, let's go to the potential true market leaders. And I've got this sorted by the weekly change. And this is now an updated list, although a few like Zoom and Peloton are on pretty thin ice as they're close to the 50-day moving average and kind of building their bases at this point. But starting at the top, we've got Corsair, and overall this recent IPO has been on a tear, and since its IPO close, it is up 187%, although definitely it's short-term extended at this point, and it's been up 6 days in a row, so be careful if you're looking for a new position at this time, but overall great action and great volume. Next up, we've got Data, and overall a very strong breakout last week on Friday, up 30% on huge volume, big blue bars. And overall, there's a lot to analyze on this chart. You've got great signs of accumulation here with a bunch of different blue bars back here within this overall base. And I may actually make a complete video about this stock, analyzing its price action. So let me know down below in the comment section if you'd like to see this. But overall, it's breaking out into all-time highs. RS is confirming and is trending above all those key moving averages. And on Friday, you did have a bunch of viable pivots, the high of the previous day, this high right here, and then obviously the true breakout into all-time highs above 37.38. Next up, we've got Tesla, which also had a nice move last week due to the S&P 500 inclusion. And overall, after this gap up and then kind of poor close here, it recovered very, very strongly on high volume the next day, and then pretty much went sideways on Thursday and Friday. Moving on, we've got NIO, another EV stock, and overall it's continuing its very strong uptrend above all those key moving averages, with the RS line confirming as well. This is one of the strongest stocks in the market, and I'll be looking for another entry as soon as it consolidates a little bit. And you could draw in a kind of short-term swing trading setup here above the all-time high, although make sure you keep a tight stop as it is definitely extended from the last base. Next up, we've got Roku, which had a bullish breakout into all-time highs on this past Friday. And overall, RS line is also into all-time highs, and it's trending above all those key moving averages. Very, very bullish. And definitely this fits the bill as a disruptive company that is shaking up the industry and growing very, very quickly. Moving on, we've got Upwork, which is similar to Fiverr. And overall, after the monster gap up on its earnings report, it's been trending higher beautifully above all those key moving averages, with the RS line confirming as well. So I'll be watching for a pullback to the 21 EMA or green dot setup to get into this high-flying name. Next up, we've got GRWG, Grow Generation Corp, and overall it's trending above those key moving averages into all-time highs, acting very, very well after its breakout on earnings. And this sector is definitely hot at this time. We've also got IIPR, which we will talk about later. But overall, it's acting very well. Although I would expect some short-term pullback in the near future, given that it was up 6 days in a row. Moving on, we've got Fiverr, which is also breaking into all-time highs on this past Friday here. And overall, the RS line is also confirming that move and is trending very, very well above those key 21 EMA and 50 simple moving averages. Moving on, we've got Zoom. Let me hide all these drawings here. And you can see after its breakdown here, it's pretty much gone sideways, but still finding resistance at the 21 EMA on the downside, and it's still not above that key 50 SMA. So in my view, it needs a little bit more time, although you could have bought it on Friday off this kind of short-term pivot here. But for me, I think it needs to build that right side of the base before I would consider getting back into this stock. Moving on, we've got PLTR along with Corsair, a very strong IPO. And overall, it was viable at a few points down here. Let me draw this pivot in at these highs. But overall, you've got this pivot before the true breakout, and then it really just took off 65% in just a few days above that 21 EMA with the RS line right at all-time highs. Very, very bullish. So that's another IPO to keep an eye on. And next up, we've got TDD, which after its gap up on earnings has pulled back a little bit and then made a nice U-turn, as a lot of these gap ups do, and is now approaching these all-time highs. And last week, you did have a potential entry on this Tuesday as it broke above this pivot. But overall, it's acting very, very well, trending above those key moving averages right near all-time highs. Moving on, we've got Peloton, which, similar to Zoom, I think needs a little bit more time after this gap down on volume. But overall, it's right at its 50 SMA and just overtook its 21 and 50 SMA on Friday. And you could have bought it here as it broke above this high, although you can see that actually was resistance. So look for it to break through that line on above average volume. Moving on, we've got Etsy, and overall it retook its 21 and 50 SMA on this past Thursday and had a nice move again on Friday, but I would expect it to find some resistance at around these levels. Next up, we've got Snap, and overall after its gap up here, it consolidated a little bit, had a false breakout here, then due to market weakness, it consolidated a little bit and pulled back to the 21 EMA in a very textbook fashion and had a nice move up off that moving average with a green dot and teal dot last week. Moving on to Futu, you can see it's right at all-time highs, and the RS line is confirming, trending above all those key moving averages, and you had a nice setup here, kind of breaking this downward trend line here, and a green dot right there as well. Moving on, we've got Crowd, which also retook that 50 SMA last week, and then consolidated for one day, and then had a nice move on this Thursday, and it's good to see it back above these key moving averages as it builds out the right side of this base here. Moving on, we've got XP, which also retook those key moving averages on this Friday on high volume, and I would expect it to challenge these kind of intermediate resistance levels at some point. SQ is trending above all those key moving averages right near all-time highs. RS line is right near all-time highs as well, and it's formed a nice consolidation pattern the past few weeks. Net, you can see after this gap up on earnings, went sideways and now is slowly drifting higher a little bit, although it did find some resistance late on Friday. Moving on, we've got Melly, which bounced off the 21 EMA late last week, and overall you can see nice tight action near that key moving average. EMPH is trending well along with the other solar names, and is right at all-time highs above those key moving averages, with the RS line confirming as well. Twilio had a nice recovery last week. You can see it moved out of this tight area here and found support at the 50 SMA, is now above those key moving averages. Apps, you can see, had a nice move on this Friday, although did have a false breakout on this Wednesday. It's above those key moving averages and now has consolidated for a few weeks and seems ready to challenge these all-time highs, although I would expect it to find some resistance at these levels. Moving on, we've got Pins, which has had a ton of days up in a row, so I would expect some consolidation right near these all-time highs, but I do expect it to challenge these at some point in the near future. I love the volume coming in here, and overall, the annual EPS estimates are very, very bullish for this name. Next up, we've got FTCH, or Farfetch Limited, and overall, it's right near all-time highs. You can see nice volume coming in, big blue bars here, and overall, you had a teal dot on this past Friday with a really nice close, so I would expect this to go higher in the near future. Moving on, we've got FSLR, and overall, along with the solar names, it's been consolidating nicely and is now starting to move up off this moving average here, the 21 EMA. So I would expect it to challenge all-time highs in the near future. Next up, we've got AMD, which has been consolidating and coiling tighter and tighter. And overall, let's show these drawings. It's close to challenging the kind of standard double bottom pivot here at 88.72. Next up, we've got CELH, and overall, you can see a nice breakout on huge volume above this pivot here. And since then, it's pretty much been going sideways and slowly drifting higher, and I would expect it to challenge these all-time highs early next week. And finally, we've got C Limited, which is right near all-time highs above those key moving averages, although it has been a little bit wide and loose here. But once again, I would expect it to challenge all-time highs in the near future, although I don't like these high volume bars here, and it hasn't formed a proper base in quite a while. So that is a check-in on the potential true market leaders, and now let's move on to the market indexes. Starting with the QQQ, the NASDAQ ETF, you can see that on this Monday, we had a nice move up of 0.78%, although on pretty low volume. And that was pretty much the story of this week, just low volume here as we drift sideways, although we have put in this kind of short-term pivot at 293.74. Overall, going to a weekly chart, you can see we're close to 3 weeks tight here. And overall, we were down 0.19% with a weekly closing range of 31.3% and a daily closing range on Friday of 3.2%. But at this time, we are in a stage 2 above a rising 10-week and 30-week simple moving average. Moving on, we've got the SPY, and overall we are down 0.77% on this index with a weekly closing range of 13.7% and a daily closing range of 3.2% on Friday. And overall, you can see we are in a stage 2 above a rising 10-week and 30-week moving average, and the expectation for this bar is pretty much sideways. It is an inside week, and at this point, there isn't really a direction here, although the closing range would indicate that we might go lower. And going back to the QQQ for just a second, the expectation from this bar is sideways or higher. You have a better closing range, and it's higher up within this week's range as well. So next up, we've got the IWM, the Russell 2000, and overall we were up 2.31%, so small caps continue to outperform, and we had a weekly closing range of 59.2% and a daily closing range on Friday of 79.1%. So you see the divergence here between the small caps and the QQQ and SPY, which had pretty bad closes on the week. And overall at this point, the expectation is sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend right near all-time highs. Next up, we've got GBDC, which is the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, and overall we are up 18% this week with a weekly closing range of 95.2% and a daily closing range of 81%, and the expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, although we are definitely short-term extended at this point. Ethereum as well had a nice week, up 23.11% with a weekly closing range of 94.9% and a daily closing range on Friday of 94.9%. And look at the volume coming in to this trust here. And going to a daily chart, we are at this point a little bit short-term extended for my taste, but we just broke above this pivot late last week. So moving on, we've got the Dow Jones, which is also in a stage 2 uptrend, and the expectation from this bar is sideways or down. And overall, we were down 0.89% last week with a weekly closing range of 4.2% and a daily closing range of 13.8%. Looking at growth stocks, the FFTY, this reflects the strong week. It was up 1.94% with a weekly closing range of 76.8% and a daily closing range on Friday of 35%. And the expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend above a rising 10-week and 30-week SMA. Moving on, we've got gold, and overall you can see another consolidation week near the 30-week moving average. And overall we are down 0.83% with a weekly closing range of 40.6% and a daily closing range on Friday of 13.8%. And the expectation from this bar is pretty much sideways, and at this point we are not in a stage 2 uptrend. Moving on, we've got the VIX, and overall we are up a little bit this week, up 2.6% with a weekly closing range of 71.3% and a daily closing range of 98.1%. And the expectation from this bar is sideways or higher. And finally, we've got XLF, the financials, and overall we are up 0.55% with a weekly closing range of 17.4% and a daily closing range of 22.2%. And the expectation from this bar is sideways or lower, although we are in a stage 2 uptrend at this time, although we are below a whole bunch of overhead supply up here. So that is a run through of the market indexes. Overall, good things. You've got nice consolidation in the large caps, the QQQ and the SPY, and overall they're right near all-time highs. So moving on to my last weekly watch list, you can see a lot of them are from my True Market Leaders list, but we'll go through their charts. So overall, sorting by the weekly change, you've got a bunch of nice performances from Airy, TTD, Snap, Net, EMPH, and Pins, and overall 11 out of the 18 were green on the week, and you had a whole bunch over 10%. But let's go through the charts, and Airy had a nice move. Let's go back to a main chart here. From this tightness down here, you had a green dot on this Wednesday, and overall a nice close to the week on Friday. TT we already covered, Snap, Nets, EMPH, Pins we already covered. Nova is consolidating nicely within the shelf, so look for a breakout above this level at about 35.95 on above average volume. MVCR had a nice breakout on Friday above these cheat entries. AMD we talked about. Zen had a nice drift higher above this short-term shelf. JKS is still building this base, although this could be forming the right side here, and I've got a alert set at this pivot of 68.74. AMRC is also in this nice consolidation here with a short-term pivot at 44.89. IIPR is in a 3 weeks tight pattern right near all-time highs above the green line, and I'll definitely be watching this next week. DQ as well is pretty much going sideways along with a lot of the solar names. ALGN has pulled back nicely to the 21 EMA, I like this tight action here and did have a teal dot, so signs of upward momentum on Friday. ARKT, you can see, try to move up, but then pulled back late last week. It pulled back below the 50 and 21 EMA, which is a little bit bearish. EXAS is pulling back here. You can see it didn't kind of break through this pivot, which I was watching, and it looks like it's going to maybe pull back to the 50 SMA at this point after the strong breakout, although it does look like it's holding close to the low of this breakout day, which is a good sign. And finally, we've got Reggie, which pulled back to the 50 SMA late last week and actually closed below it on this Friday, although it was on lower volume. So overall, a pretty good week from my watch list. We had some nice performances up here, but also some stocks that are pulling back to those key moving averages and need a little bit more time. So make sure you guys stay tuned for my next weekly watch list, which I'll be posting later today. Moving on to sentiment, let's talk about my sentiment surveys. So overall, we saw an increase from 50.2% bullish to now 54.6% bullish, which is on the higher end of things. And if we go to the NAAIM Exposure Index, you can see we now are above 100, which is a short-term kind of bearish clue here. This isn't a good sign, so maybe we have a flush next week. And if we look at the bears versus bulls, you can see we're above or near that 60 level, which also is a little bit on the extended end. And if we go to the put-call ratio, we are pretty much just kind of going sideways, but we are at a reasonably low level here. So there are signs that sentiment is a little bit too bullish at this point, but remember that price action is king and treat each stock individually. And this is kind of a secondary thing that you should look at. So that is sentiment. And now let's move on to the IBD Big Picture article. And the headline is Stock Market Fades Late, but Growth Stocks Climb for Second Straight Session. Reading through, they discussed the FFTY, which we talked about, which was up 1% at one point on Friday, IPR and QRVO, which are both in 3 weeks type patterns. And moving down, you've got some talk of curfews being reinstated due to the coronavirus. And they also discussed some large cap stocks like Amazon, Microsoft, Nvidia, and Facebook and Adobe, which are kind of lagging here. They're going sideways and kind of dragging down the overall market. So keep that in mind. But you've got some nice moves from Billy and Data, as we already talked about, as well as CrowdStrike and NVCR. And you've got some nice breakouts on the IBD50, FUTU, and PanW, AMAT, ENTG, and Teradyne. So that is kind of a run through of the article. And overall, their current outlook is a confirmed uptrend with 3 distribution days on the NASDAQ and 2 on the S&P 500. And moving on to the GMI signal, we are green since the close on November 5th, and we have a GMI score of 6 out of 6 on Thursday. So overall, taking everything into account, including the price action of the leading stocks in the market and the overall market indexes, my current view is we are in a confirmed uptrend at this time, and I'll be looking to increase my exposure if stocks continue to set up and act well next week. So thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys in future videos.